In this time, it is about protecting lives and preventing people from dying, and that you have to speak up.
When we talk about Black Lives Matter, we've taken in a route around like criminal justice. We haven't really done the work in Minnesota to really address it from a public health and overall healthcare perspective. We need to do that. And I think when we do that and we do it right, we can't end it, we can solve it. But Minnesota, we really, like as a state, we really got to get out of our silos. We really got to come together and incorporating everybody in solving HIV.
I want to get in and let people know it's not a death sentence. What do AIDS and HIV look like? Because it didn't look like me.
All of a sudden, she's like, well, look at that. How does that make you feel? And I was like, horrible, thank you.
And then she said, tell me more.
And I said, more I will tell.
I'm loving this admiration, and it's well-founded. Patrick, I want to go back to something you said. I want to go back to your silos comment.
Yeah.
Are you talking about HIV service organizations coming together, or the community at large, or what are you referring to?
I think everything, right?
Okay.
So I currently I'm a co-chair of the state of Minnesota passed legislation to create the African American Health State Advisory Council. I'm the co-chair of that council. It's the first of its kind. And I'm also on the HIV Council for the state as well. I'm a co-chair for that as well. I think what I find is that in our HIV world, we're extremely siloed. We don't work, we don't talk unless there's a crisis.
Oh, that's very true.
And even when there's a crisis, we have one or two agencies trying to lead that effort rather than trying to really understand what's happening with all of our organizations and have a unique catered response and a message that everybody is agreed to and everybody can get on board with. I think across the state, the thing is like HIV intersects with so many different things.
Yep.
You know, as I'm getting older, I'm navigating high blood pressure, cholesterol, you know, neurological issues, other comorbidities that are just like dermatological issues. Like again, it's just like there's so many intersectional pieces. I think we need to get unique in our response. You know, I think we need to get unique and innovative in how we bring other kind of issues to the table to address the larger piece. I think a piece that, you know, and I'm going to jump on it and jump off because people get lost, but like right now, 340B, which is the second largest federal program out there that supports individuals who can't afford healthcare. It's supposed to supplement their care. That's something that we should be supporting and getting on board, but it's a very taboo topic right now. So we silo ourselves very deeply and we don't talk. And in Minnesota, what I've noticed when I first moved here, there's like one or two agencies that like really more one that essentially is seen as a pillar in the state. And my larger piece of this is that it pushes other organizations that are doing great work to the side. And when we need to right now, more importantly, as we're seeing the federal landscape impact us in Minnesota, we need to have a collective response. We need to come together, and we're not doing that in a way that's kind of collective liberation that's tied to that.
You know what's fascinating about this? 30 plus years later, I'm still hearing that this is the case, that we're siloing. I remember at HCMC, I became the director of case management for a while. I think you were gone at that time.
I was gone.
Yep. And as I was hiring new case managers, and I remember a representative from the Department of Human Services came. I remember her name, but I'm not going to mention it because I don't want to go after her too strongly. But she was an African-American woman, and she said, you need to give all of your Black clients to the Urban League. And I said, I'm not doing that in a second. I will never give any of those people away because the Black community was not supportive of their own community and HIV. And it was so stigmatized. And it's interesting to hear you say the siloing piece. Like I found myself very protective. Please.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is the thing too. I mean, I think it's important, and it's double-sided. I mean, Urban League, I wasn't here, but when I hear the stories, it sounds like Urban League was a hot mess.
Correct.
I think what we, even right now, is we see organizations like the African American, AIDS Task Force close, and we see no real funding focus on, the Latina population and African American population. My concern is that organizations, are so broad in terms of their service delivery, they don't have the capacity to focus on the unique needs of, underserved and disproportionately affected communities. So I think siloing is beneficial to some extent when we're trying to cater resources to organizations that really need that focus.
Yep.
But I think, right now with our current landscape of having no organizations that are funded by MDH or DHS, someone out there, correct me if I'm wrong, that are being funded that uniquely support. I think the only organization right now that does that kind of work is the Youth and AIDS Projects. They uniquely serve Black and Brown community, like exclusively, and young people really well. Outside of that, every organization is pretty widespread. When we silo, we can't talk about best practices in terms of how to serve every Minnesotan. That was real Minnesotan. We can't.
Where'd your accent come from?
We can't, but we got to talk. And so I think this is where we learn best practice. When we silo, and in Minnesota, I've noticed, we silo deep. I have had conversations with some organizations, even to say, hey, can you give me insight in who's the best contact to do this? And they go, we can't give you that. Why not? We're all in this together. Why can't you give me your contact? But you'll call me when you need something and say, Patrick, I need you to show up for this, and can you bring 10 people? Can you make sure they're Black? Okay, so you'll call me when you need something, and I'll surely do it to support you, but when I need something from your organization to support my cause, like this conference, what happens is that we don't have that level of support. And it takes time. I get it. We're changing
But we don't
culture,
have time.
but we do not have time. Right. And I think if it sounds like these are things that were happening in the 90s, why do we keep...
It is unbelievable to hear some of this, Patrick, I'll tell you.
But we have to be willing to take this feedback. When I moved to Minnesota, I was throwing tables. I was like, why are y'all doing it this way? It doesn't make sense. I've lost a little bit of steam because it's a wear out. It's like, again, coming from the South, and and this is where we have to recognize where solidarity works. The South came together and really mobilized and had one message. People are dying, we need money, and we need it now. And every conference, every legislator that was kind of in that region, they had a very central message. I don't know the unique message, but they had a very central message. What did that result in? It resulted in a grant years ago called the Care and Prevention in the United States that resulted in millions of dollars being flooded into the South. It resulted in the EHE effort. Thousands, if not millions of dollars going into the South to support the supplement Ryan White dollars. The Midwest didn't get that.
And even pharma created some initiatives just for the South to be funded.
Yes. And so it's important to note that when you come together in solidarity, you leave your silos, you're able to do great things. And again, my wish is that the Midwest, the upper Midwest specifically, can do that. I think one of the things we haven't talked about as it relates to data is that Minnesota, I think their African-American population, I think their Latina population is around 8%, around 8%-ish in the last census count. But yet they represent the most population, the most percentile of diagnoses, 8% of the population. So Black folks are 8% of the population in Minnesota, but represent the highest number of new cases of HIV.
Do you know what that percentage is?
I do not.
Okay.
Terry, do you have
know?
that?
I don't have it off the top of my head.
Do you have any guess? Okay.
But it's true.
It is.
It's high.
And you can see it across the country as well. So it's really something that for those of us who have been around for a while know that this is what is happening to the community, but yet there's no real concerted effort to really address it. And that's about racism. I mean, underlying why is the community disproportionately impacted? It's racism.
Yeah.
I mean, why do people not get the jobs that they want? Because of their race. Why do they not get the education they need? Because of race. I mean, it's all tied to this. That's why, when we look at this from a public health perspective, social determinants of health influence why people do or do not get certain diseases. Yeah. And one of those is about racism and sexism.
And I'm surprised, sitting between you two, my accent has not come out yet. I've been hiding, I've been holding. But I think, and I don't know, because we talked earlier, you're from Savannah. I think, my folks lived in a small town with railroad tracks. And one side of the railroad tracks were black, the other side was white. And if you were of color, probably you're going to be on the black side. But I think it's important to note, when I first moved to Minnesota, and I was kind of getting these experiences, I was like, what is going on? And I met with somebody from, I want to say they were from Arkansas, and they were like, sit down, baby. Let me explain this to you, because I know it's a little strange. I had this issue too. And what I was told, which it kind of was like revealing, was that in the South, racism is extremely overt. You see it on with Confederate flags. You know, when you walk into a store, you're called boy, or you get a look. Jim Crow is very visible. Where in like the Midwest, racism is extremely covert. And the example that was given to me was like, in the South, someone will go, I don't believe in Black Lives Matter, but Patrick is a good black. Why? Because he's respectful. He says yes, so no, sir. And he has an education and he speaks well. Where in Minnesota, people will go, Black Lives Matter, but Patrick, he just, in these meetings, he's just loud. And he always has something to say. And so I think in Minnesota, what I found is that, racism is extremely covert. And Jim Crow is not necessarily visible, that you can see it, but it's visible in the pearly whites of someone's teeth when they smile at you, and tell you something like, I don't even know what they would say, but something kind of like passive aggressive, like Minnesota nice, that, that we're so used to kind of, uplifting when it really should be, beat down. But that's an experience. And I think what we have to push back and address these elephants in the room. And I say that out loud because I think we cannot, again, we talked about this earlier as it relates to the tie-in with HIV and solving other things like COVID. But think about if we can solve kind of these larger systems such as racism, such as sexism, how that can move us into a space where we can be moving in a direction that creates
everybody come together.
Yeah, everybody comes together.
Listening to Patrick talk about this, and it reminds me of how is this tied to long-term survival and people aging with HIV. It's tied to this theory called weathering. So people of color, and particularly Black people, just navigating life as a Black person in the United States or a Hispanic person in the United States, this constant hit of stress, being called boy, being looked
strikes.
at, being followed in, the grocery store because they think you're going to steal. That is stress. And that stress hitting you constantly weathers the body. So when I think about aging with HIV and long-term survival, right now in the United States, over 50% of all people living with HIV are 50 and older. And that's amazing in some ways because science kept folks alive. The other reason why that stat is true is because we've got people being diagnosed after 50, which means we're failing.
Right.
But if our friends and family and the people that we love in our community are ever going to have a chance to live to 70, 80, 90 with HIV, that's where racism has to be addressed in this equation because of the weathering piece. They're never going to have a chance to get to live that long if racism is beating them every day. And I want my friends and the folks that I love to be able to get to live longer. I want people to get to live to their 80s and 90s. I want that to happen. And so I think that's the bridge of this conversation is weathering happens, and it can prevent people from getting to age well with HIV.
Yes. Rebutting off of what Patrick has said, if we all can just come together and it not be a color thing, maybe a lot of these things can be resolved. Don't just look at yourself. Look at the bigger picture. It's going to help everybody. not just one or two individuals, but it'll help everybody. In Savannah, I live what you call in the suburbs. So I had mixture.
Yep.
That's how I was raised. So I didn't look at black, white, colors and stuff like that because that's how I was raised. But then when I got here, I saw the difference. I'm like, well, at home, we get along. Why I got here and all this is going on and stuff like that. So I had to adapt to the Minnesota nice. I had to adapt to that. And me, I'm going to hang in there until you prove me wrong. Mm-hmm. Until you prove me wrong or you rub me wrong. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm going to be quiet, but I can get feisty, but you're going to have to rub me wrong. But I guess I just hung in there because I just felt that Minnesota was going to take me somewhere. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm for the people of color and all the other people. And I'm going to fight. Mm-hmm. I'm going to fight to the end because I'm living with this.
And we're going to fight with you.
That's right.
I mean, there's so many things that are happening in Minnesota to help make sure people get to age with HIV
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
in a way that, you know, makes them have a quality of life. You know, there's lots of conversations happening about aging with HIV. I mean, the conference that Patrick is organizing, we're having a whole pre-conference on HIV and aging.
Okay.
You know, like 4 to 5 hours of top experts in the country are coming to talk about aging with HIV. And that is, you know, a conversation that I first started hearing about in 1998, but is now becoming kind of more popular to talk about because of what we're seeing happening across our countries, that people are aging with HIV, and we've got to learn about what happens to the body. You know, why do people, as they age with HIV, have more possibility of having comorbidities than their counterparts that don't have HIV?
Well, the truth of the matter is, boy, when we started seeing people survive in 96 with the establishment of new medication treatments that allowed people to survive, I remember asking a physician, so what does this mean? And he said, I have no idea. None of us have any idea.
We didn't think people were going to live.
We not only didn't think people were going to live, but I remember seeing people, and you know, we called it the Lazarus syndrome, like rising from the dead. Mm-hmm. And I used to do presentations and workshops on that to help people understand this is what you do now that you've survived. Because there was so much survivor's guilt at that point as well. Like if you survived and your partner didn't, or your other friends did not. So it was a really difficult time. But I'm very struck by something. I mean, I want to just comment on your comment, resiliency, and talk about what you just said, Sherry. Mm-hmm. Like this whole concept of like, I'm giving people the benefit of the doubt until they cross me and then watch the fuck out. And I'm kind of loving that energy of yours because the truth of the matter is we have to be resilient and we have to keep going. And Patrick, all of the strength that you talked about related to race and related to moving forward and progressing and where you've come and whatnot, we all have to do this together. Mm-hmm. I'm just so saddened by the fact that we still deal with this. Go ahead, please.
I think we still deal with it, but I think, you know, even today, the four of us have had a very promising conversation around the tools that we need to implement to make the change. I think if we can expand this conversation and get other people on board and begin to coalition build in a way that is not just about winning an election, in a way about not just trying to address one singular issue. I mean, again, if we're really serious about this, how can we move this in a direction where we can really take it to the next level? And I think, again, that it's just not solely about solving HIV. We can be solving other, you know, complex issues as well. And so, again, it's about how do we coalition build, get people to the table. And again, I think sometimes what I've been so accustomed, my parents have taught me, and, you know, a certain Shirley, is you bring a folding chair. A folding chair. And I've just been so used to just inserting myself in certain conversations and just, you know, making sure that I'm present and there. And so I think these things are uniquely important. And again, it's sad, but I think one of the things that we are seeing today at the federal level is that when we are not in solidarity, we begin to see how everyone is ultimately impacted. We are seeing how our basic freedoms are beginning to unravel. I mean, we are seeing a president that is uniquely entertaining the fact that individuals who are American citizens could be possibly deported to other countries. And so I think, again, and what we know is, it's against the law, but what we know, this administration is uniquely interested in breaking the law and fighting with the courts. And so I think what we know is that more than now, we all have to figure out our shit and come together to address these larger issues. And as somebody, again, and I know we talked about this, I've been living with HIV for over 10 years. I never identified myself as a long-term survivor. Never, and I've been choked up about this larger issue, but now that I'm identifying myself as such, I'm thinking around, my own future, my peers, but then also, folks that are newly diagnosed. I've worked in clinical settings. I've diagnosed people. For me, that's my unique concern, is ensuring that they also have the resources and tools. And what we're seeing is, again, I wasn't here for the 90s, but I've spent the time educating myself, doing a lot of reading. And what I'm seeing is that we're slowly moving back into those times. And it's scary. It is really, it's petrifying to think that, I have navigated trauma as a Black gay man living with HIV, but where we are going, maybe, take me to my mental limit, and we are steps away from that. So,
I'm not sure that folks know this stat that I'm about to share. You just reminded me by making sure that folks, have the tools they need when they're diagnosed. When I think about older people with HIV, seeing my friends age with HIV, I'm also concerned about us not thinking about the sexual health needs and HIV prevention needs of people over 50. And one of the reasons why I'm very concerned about it is because we have data from the CDC that shows the older you are when you're diagnosed, the more likely you are to be concurrently diagnosed with AIDS. So when we look at data from 2022, so folks like 50 and older, 34.1% of the people that were diagnosed during that year that were 50 and older had an AIDS diagnosis at the time of their diagnosis. So we're failing. So we're not talking to people about their sexual health. And that's about ageism. Somebody comes and they're 50 and older and you're like, oh, I bet they don't have sex or they're not using drugs. I don't need to talk to them. I don't need to do a sexual health history. I don't need to talk to them about HIV prevention. I don't need to talk to them about, hey, do you know that there is this treatment now called PrEP that you can either take a pill or an injection and it'll actually prevent you from getting HIV? Those conversations are not happening. And so, when we think about giving people the opportunity just to age in the United States, whether they have HIV or not, we have to make sure people have the education and the information. And that's another thing that the country leadership is trying to get rid of. They don't want people to be educated. They want a dumb citizen base.
That is apparent in so many different ways, whether it's television, public television, or books or whatnot. I first talked to my physician about it. I'm going to share a personal story. I talked to my physician maybe 5 years ago about getting on PrEP, and he said, I don't know what that is. And I said, okay, well, I need you to find out. And he was a friend of mine. And so I was kind of like, well, I need you to find out. And he goes, I really am not comfortable prescribing it because I don't know what the follow-up is.
That's malpractice.
Correct. Number two, I go to my next doctor and I said, I need you to understand, I'm a man who has sex with men. I'm in that category. I need you to understand what the health issues are related to me. I understand what PrEP is. And my second doctor, however, I think I shared this story. I kind of laughed and he said, are you finished? I was like, oh, bitch, if you're going to go after me on something. And he said, I know more about HIV than you do. I interned at the Red Door Clinic. And I said, why is that? He said, my medical school was at the University of Minnesota, which I'm really grateful. He was really great and he knows what he's doing. And I'm on PrEP now. But I'll also tell you something about PrEP. I went to the emergency room for an injury that I had. And the doctor said, so you're positive?
Yep.
And
it happens a lot.
And I said, I'm sorry? And, not that I would have any shame about that, but I literally said, what makes you think I'm HIV positive? He said, you're on Truvada. And he said, that's an HIV drug.
Yep.
And I said, well, it's also PrEP as well. And he goes, what's PrEP?
Yep.
What the hell is going on? So our professional medical community also needs a great deal of education.
Which is why the AIDS Education Training Center should not be cut. That funding out of the Ryan White program is going to make stories like that happen more often.
So I want to jump back to personal, and I know I'm doing an abrupt shift. I want to know more about what the biggest challenge is for the two of you as you live with HIV from day to day.
When I was diagnosed with HIV, Dr. Maddie, told me when I was ready to start medication, I had to be ready and sure because I had to take it for the rest of my life. And so that, when I started, I was taking Prezista, Truvada, and Kobe, which was a study drug. So I was taking 4 pills when I first started, which went down to like 2 and then 1, and then a long-acting injectable. And so I mentioned that because for years, up until I think 2022, 2021, I was taking pills. And it was extremely difficult because, I live a very active lifestyle. At one point I was flying for Delta Airlines, and I was like flying internationally in different time zones, trying to figure out like, when do I need to take my meds?
Yeah.
And so I think, adherence has definitely been, up until my long-acting injectable journey, it was difficult. That was one of the hardest pieces of that. I think additionally, just trying to, relationships. Before I got married, dating, that was hard. I found myself on a layover in Greece in a park, drunk on the floor, eating Cheetos, crying.
That's a description.
It was a good description. Crying, wondering why I was by myself and why nobody wanted me. And my other friend, who I didn't know at the time, was also positive and Black and gay, was like, girl, me too. And I was just like having a moment. And then fast forward a couple months later, I met my husband. We were married for 8 years, and I just, a couple weeks ago, finalized a divorce. And during separation, I've been dating, and I'm now like actively dating, and navigating those nuances of recognizing, as even though I'm somebody living with HIV for over 10 years, I'm still valuable. I don't have to settle when I date.
Fuck no.
And I'm not, exactly. And I think another piece of it is like recognizing, another component of this like hard lesson, the difficulty is like recognizing that, although I have a lot of things that make living difficult, I can still thrive. So I've run back-to-back marathons before. I've done a lot of things where I've pushed my brain or my body to the limit. I'm freaking working full-time, going to school full-time for a doctorate. Yeah. That's maddening within itself. I don't even know how I do it.
I'm not sure how you do it either.
I don't know. We'll talk offline. But I think,
I have an appointment on Tuesday.
I'll talk offline. I think the largest thing for me, is my own vulnerability.
Say more about that.
Yeah, I think, recognizing that although I do a lot of stuff, I'm still flesh and blood. Uh-huh. I still navigate, complexities from my late diagnosis of HIV. I am still somebody who has a lot of inflammation and joint pain and issues that I try to ignore, but I can't. And I think another piece of this is I'm, dating again, and, I'm having to combat the need for love from others and love myself. And so these are continuous battles of vulnerability, to be vulnerable, to say, how do I delineate, physical connection with self-love?
Patrick, you are a human being. Mm-hmm. And so what you just described is not about being HIV positive. It's about being a human being.
Human shit.
And needing to love yourself before you can really love somebody else and establish a healthy relationship.
And I will say the last thing, being a Black gay man living with HIV, I think what I didn't tell you, when I came out, my parents prayed on me. My mother went for the holy water. Oof. I think so growing up in a very religious family, I've navigated my parents saying, we love you, but you're still going to hell. So I think, coming up through there, I've navigated, and it's really funny. I started working with a therapist. Shout out to my therapist, Ashley, because when I met her, she was white and Native. And I was like, since being in Minnesota, I've had this unique, complex issue with white women. And she was like, yeah, white women suck sometimes. And I was like, okay, I can dig it. Maybe you can be my therapist. But I say all of this because for me, I've had to do a lot of trauma work.
Yeah.
Because what I forget to recognize is that my own HIV diagnosis and my resiliency has compounded trauma. And although I've been able to do great things in my life, kind of as an HIV advocate, in that pursuit, I've been compounding trauma.
Yeah.
And I think I'm in a space today where I've done a lot of that work. And that's something that I think will always haunt me, is that trauma. And I think some of that survival guilt, where I have a lot of friends who are my age who didn't get in care, who stopped taking their meds, who've died, who've lost their battle with mental health. And so I think that's another component that I'm living with every day. But every week I have to go into sessions with my therapist and work through that, because that shit is deep and it's real. And I think living with HIV and working with patients who are living with or affected by HIV as well for years, I want it to be, a superhero and save people. And I was, again, as a flight attendant, I use this metaphor, but I was putting on other people's oxygen mask before putting it on myself. And I've been dying slowly. And it took, a really negative experience at Red Door Clinic to recognize I got to take care of me. And so I got to get in the gym. I got to eat healthy. I got to prioritize my mental health. And I think that has been the biggest struggle, is taking accountability for ignoring me. So I'll pass to you.
Okay. Well, there's 3 things that was a struggle and still is a little struggle with me. Is go back to stigma. Before, a matter of fact, I'm gonna let you guys know that my beau, my friend, my love, is the guy that I contracted HIV with. We're together. And before we decided that we were gonna be together, my stigma came in where I didn't know how, if I was to meet someone, how to tell them that I was HIV positive. That was my struggle. That was something that really bothered me. And when I was in my groups, they would, my facilitator would tell us about the dating apps and stuff like that. And everybody, we would even go on our phone and get hooked up on the dating apps and stuff. But me, I would never get on a dating app. I said, because I didn't know, I didn't want that rejection.
Yeah, it's real.
I did not want that rejection. And sometimes I think maybe I set myself up with being with the person I contracted it with. Because now we're 2 different people. And I see it in me, but they don't see it in them with me. And sometimes I get irritated. I get irritated with them. And I've sat them down and, talked to them and stuff, but they seem to not get it. But in saying that, I'm still nervous to meet someone and really like them. And then how do I tell them? Do I tell them and being in a long relationship with them, or do I tell them ahead of time and they reject me, or we done been together for a long time without even being intimate or anything, and then all of a sudden I get that nerve to tell them, and then they just reject me altogether. That was one of my things. And the other thing is taking all those pills. Taking all those pills for the rest of my life. I got many things going on, because a lot of times it's not HIV or AIDS that make you get sick or will take you out. It'd be other things that's going on with you. And I have many things going on, but I pray and I just keep moving. I just keep moving and taking them pills, because I know if I don't take them pills, it's going to make my viral load bad, and everything. And I just take day by day and, hoping that I can make a difference and let people know that this is not a death sentence. That back in the days it was, but they got things that now, medication and stuff that can help you. But like we said about the Medicaid and all that, if they stop that, then quite naturally we ain't gonna be here. But You know, it's gotten better. Life has gotten better with me, gotten better because my body has been through a lot since I've been in Minnesota. So, you know, I just take day by day.
I'm very struck, Sherry, by what sounds like, again, I'm commented on how human your experience is of needing to figure out how to love yourself so you can really put yourself out there again after your divorce 2 weeks ago. I have a feeling congratulations is in order on that somehow. So I hope everything's okay. It's quite a transition. But you know, you talk about having some fear, like if you weren't with the person who infected you and who you share that infection with, if you weren't with that person, how to disclose, how to put yourself out there strongly and confidently. Patrick is looking at you with some really strong eyes right now.
Well, I think the reason I'm looking at you is that, you know, I've experienced this. I on my blog and my work, I tell people you got to do what's comfortable for you.
Yeah.
But for me, I just tell people straight out the gate, you know, and I have the joy of being able, I have my own content, so I can just send them a video or I can send them a project I've been a part of. And that breaks the ice. But what I found, even, you know, being in these streets now, and again, I think it's different as a gay man, rather than like a cis woman. I think for me, what I found is that a lot more people are either taking PrEP, you know, or educated. But you know, if people are ignorant about it, do I really want to surround myself with ignorance?
Yeah.
And having to, you know, navigate that? I think it's a complexity, but again, the Patrick years ago and, you know, wrapping up a marriage found themselves settling. And I think where I'm at now, if there's any issue that you have about me and what I bring to the table in any kind of relationship, there's not, I don't want to waste my time.
Yeah. And with that being said, it's like they're not open like I am. And they get to the point like when I do things like this, or I go to my group, or I get with my friends that's HIV like myself, it's like you always in talking about HIV. And that kind of smothers me. Because this is where I'm at in my life.
Yeah.
This is what's going on with me. It's going on with you also, but you in denial.
Okay.
That's why the separation comes in, because I want to make a difference. So I feel that we should depart. And maybe I shouldn't have said this. But this is how I'm feeling. This is how I'm feeling.
You should absolutely say that.
This is how I'm feeling, because I feel that if something big is going to happen, that's going to take me to that next level. And if you're not a part of it, then I need to surround myself that what makes me a part of what I want to do.
You know, Sherry, there was this study that came out in the 90s, and I can't remember the title of it, but it talked about that one way that people living with HIV kind of do better in their life and navigate and kind of come to a place of loving themselves and accepting themselves is because they surround themselves with and they put positive people, which I interpreted as not only other people living with HIV, but people who had a shared vision of an amazing future.
Yeah.
And that sounds like what you want to do.
I have 3 sons. They're all grown. And I'm doing me. I'm living my best life. And I'm going to school for business administration online. And I feel good. It's a challenge with all the things I do and whatnot, but I get it done. I get it done, you know, and I like it. And I'm a crafty person. So when I'm feeling some kind of way, I got so many things I can do, you know, and I give everybody some of my time, you know.
But it sounds like we're navigating nuances in our lives that are very normal, that are very normal. And I think, again, nobody understands what it feels like sometimes to wake up and be like sore. Or nobody understands as you get closer to your seroversary if you feel sad or you feel feelings. I mean, I think, again, the identity is to some extent a double-edged sword. It's a badge of honor, but it's also to some extent a burden that we, you know, sometimes feel like we're carrying. But I just kind of rewrite the inner script in my mind and how I see that, because I just feel like I'm carrying the legacy of my ancestors that aren't here, and just carry on their memory and their contributions. Because again, I mean, I think I'm blessed enough to still be here and be able to thrive. And that's where, you know, I've had this love relationship with Minnesota. Because again, if it's not people like us at this table that are having these important conversations, we begin to forget about the people who died ensuring that we could still be here.
Exactly.
Again, I think we were talking pre-show or yesterday, and you were saying like the, you know, average lifespan before medication and the advances in technology were like, what, 1 to 2 years?
Yeah. And it also depends on where you live in the world. It could be shorter.
And I'm over 10 years. I mean, it when you told me that, I got emotional, because I'm like, geez, I mean, this boy that was wasting, had thrush, you know, basically age defying, is out here running marathons, you know, having divorces, living life.
And doing God's work, as I like to say, doing God's work.
That's right. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
I have so many other questions that I want to ask everyone, but I want to go through some terminology. So PrEP we've referenced a number of times, which stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis. What I am astounded by is that no one knows about PEP either.
Yeah.
And that's her older sister that nobody should forget about.
Yeah.
So if anyone is at risk of having an unsafe sexual practice, go to the ER, and you should be getting a medication to help prevent HIV transmission if you feel that you've been
Although
at risk.
it may be cheaper to go to urgent care.
Well, and I think the big
That's
thing,
a whole nother matter.
yeah, the big thing about PEP, you have a 72-hour window after exposure, and this is kind of based on non-occupation, so if it's not tied to work. The other piece is, again, think about your, especially in Minnesota, think about your, like, and not even in Minnesota, even other places, first call your public health department. If, again, when we think about funding going away, access cost, and also knowledge base, think about your public health departments, because usually they have availability and they want to help you. Where emergency care is going to be expensive, you may have to wait hours, and if you're down to the wire in your window, that may not be beneficial, because they're not going to triage you and prioritize you because you're not bleeding and are dying. So just making sure that, you know, as soon as you know you had exposure, immediately begin to pursue post-exposure prophylaxis.
I want to talk about being undetectable and being untransmittable.
I always say this because Terry and I work professionally. If I'm missing anything, jump in. It essentially means that if you are undetectable, which means your viral load is less than 50 copies, and that's a whole other kind of equation that they use when they look at your labs. But it basically means your body does not have enough virus in a sample of blood. And what it means is that if you are undetectable, science has proven that you cannot transmit the virus. Sexually. And so that has been proven. And so again, when we have, as somebody who is in these streets, when I'm having conversations with, you know, potential sex partners or people that I'm potentially going on dates with and having this conversation, I am very clear to identify to people like, I'm also undetectable. I think a part of this conversation that is important to recognize is that there are folks out there that are not, like they are doing everything that they need to do to take care of themselves, but they're not undetectable. There are just complexities that make it very difficult to maintain an undetectable status. And again, that's going to take us well beyond the time that we have in the show. But I think if someone's not undetectable and they have a detectable viral load, it doesn't indicate that they're not doing what they need to do.
Right.
It's just everybody responds differently to medication, and there's different kind of variants of the virus that have, you know, mutations that respond differently to medication.
And I think that's important to point out because, you know, when the campaign, which it was a campaign around undetectable equals and transmittable, kind of exploded, which, by the way, the Swiss are the people that figured this out. And so
I first heard it really in the US.
It happened
in
years
San
and years and years ago.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to mention that, you know, when the undetectable equals untransmittable campaign came out, it was around combating stigma.
Yep,
you know,
of course.
But to Patrick's point, some people are just unable. They're taking their medication. They cannot get to this undetectable level. And so in some ways, the U equals U campaign actually ended up stigmatizing a certain percentage of people living with HIV.
And you know what's so silly about this? And we've referenced so much about communication and talking this through. The reality is, no matter what your status is, it's still about having open, honest dialogue.
Yeah.
Whether you put yourself back out in that dating world, or as you explore the dating world, or any of us do for that matter. And frankly, people who are negative versus positive. Everyone needs to have the same fucking conversations.
Yes.
And they're really simple conversations to have. Having a sexually transmitted illness, frankly, that is, for the most part, manageable, should not be a scary conversation. And going, Patrick, to something that you said about settling, don't settle for something who doesn't do the work. I have so many of my patients who have come to me and said, I end up having to educate people on what being HIV positive is, and they want to know what's safe and what's unsafe. And I say, not your job.
Right.
The other person has the responsibility to figure that out for themselves, because no one who's positive should be in that role of deciding for someone else what to do sexually.
Yes.
It's a really easy topic.
Yes.
I want to know what the three of you feel you'd like someone who is newly diagnosed to know and how to proceed.
Go and call a clinic, call somebody to get, what you need. If you need counseling, you need group therapy, you need a psychologist or whatever, go and get those things, and just tell people how you feel. Tell you how you feel, what you feeling at that moment. What you need for them to do for you. But most of all, just know that it's not a death sentence. It's not like it used to be, and you can talk to people. And, let your family know. Who's the closest to you, talk to them. Don't let stigma take over your life.
I was going to say without fear.
Yeah, don't let stigma take over your life, because that will bring you down just as bad. That stress will take you out. And that's what kept me strong. Because my counselor told me, he said, stress will kill you. And I said, well, I don't want no stress. I'm going to stay alive. So I took the stress out of the equation.
Easier said than done.
I took the stress out the equation. And I just did what I needed to do.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, for me, the big thing is knowledge is power and silence equals death. I mean, for me, my big thing is don't settle, and not even just partners. I'm talking about even your medical team. There's been so many times I've had to fire providers because they're not doing what they need to do.
Yep.
And I think being newly diagnosed is no different. You have a say in who provides you care. And you can tell them how you want them to give you your care. I think additionally, you mentioned family. I think, again, I want to expand on that definition of family. The person that you sit on the phone with at night and gossip with until 2:00 in the morning is, I don't know, is considered family. And so I think, again, disclosure is sacred in this space. It is sacred. And, be very wary of who you disclose to. I remember back in the day in the 20s in DC, having a whole party club circle that I disclosed to, and everybody disappeared because of stigma. I thought I could trust them. And so, your friends may not be the friends that you continue on with after you were diagnosed. You may have shifts in who you identify as family, even in 2025 and beyond. And so my big thing is just be ready to disclose when you're ready. Be cognizant about, who you disclosed to, because once it's out there, you can't take it back. So be ready. I think another piece is knowing that this journey is, it's going to require resilience and vulnerability. It's shitty. I mean, it's not butterflies and rainbows, right? But it's life.
Yes.
It's like adulting at 36. As a millennial, going through everything I've gone through, is it really like fun? Even if you take HIV out of the equation, it's been
life.
Yeah. And so I say all of that because, life is already hard. It's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. I think 10 plus years into this, it's not been easy, but I think I've gotten another lease on life. And I think that's the last thing I'll say is that this experience gave me another lease on life where I value my life. I value my relationships. I value the time that I get to spend with people. And I'll say this finally, I have this saying that a good friend of mine, Gage Ravina, who's a deputy director of Youth and AIDS Project, told me, and I carry this with me every day. It's your presence is a privilege. And I carry that with me to this day. And I would tell somebody newly diagnosed that the people that they involve in their life to carry that mantra, your presence and to them is a privilege. And so be mindful of the time you give to people because it's important. Mental health is, and your overall holistic health is important as you navigate this new journey.
As you know, we were often there.
We were.
Somebody
with a newly diagnosed person.
Was newly diagnosed, whether it was their first time coming into the clinic that we worked at or they were in the hospital when they found out.
And I worked on the AIDS line.
Yeah.
So people would call confidentially and say, I think I'm positive. What do I do?
Right.
Right.
I mean, I think, one of the things that I would tell them was before you were diagnosed, somebody was fighting for you. And it makes me think of the Denver Principles in 1983, that a group of people in a very hard period of our history got together, went to a medical conference. And when I say these people, I mean these were people living with HIV that went to Denver to a medical conference and put together a document called the Denver Principles that outlined that people with HIV have a right to a sexual life. They have a right to be at the table, to be on a board of directors.
To be a parent.
Yeah, to get to make medical decisions, to get to live and to die how they want to. I would just want this person to know somebody's been fighting for you for decades so that you can have the opportunity to live the best possible life you can, to have access to medication, to have access to social services, and to be part of this beautiful, big community. And so embrace that. Go to support groups. Go to the United States Conference on HIV and AIDS, where there's thousands of people living with HIV who come to this conference. Come to the Minnesota HIV conference. Come and be part of the community. It's a beautiful community. I have met some of the most fabulous people I have ever met in my life because of this community. And you get to be part of this, and they will help you and they will navigate with you. They're not going to let you fall away. They want you to be here and they want you to be in community together. And I know it's a scary time and you probably have a lot of questions and you probably have a million things going through your head, but there's going to be people who want to hold your hand and help you navigate.
Yeah.
For sure. All of that was incredibly helpful and encouraging and supportive and smart and not giving into ignorance that I think is a really big piece of this world that we live in. I want to thank the three of you so much for sharing your story. You are delightful. I feel like I've been in this bubble of conversation that I could go on for hours and hours and hours. I will say it's very likely we're going to need a part 2 on this, especially if there are policy changes in this world. And so I heard that under your voice. And hopefully none of that happens. But this is going to be an ongoing conversation. I'm really grateful for all three of you. Terry, it's been a pleasure working these decades with you. You know, you and I have talked many times when I would visit New York City and we'd go out for dinner and find the right vegetarian place. You know, the reality is you and I have done this forever, and there's not many of us around anymore that continue to do this work because it's been really hard to stay in it.
Yeah, but it's been an honor
It
and
has
a privilege.
been an incredible privilege.
I'm lucky.
We are both very fortunate to have shared these journeys with people, including the two of you.
Thank you.
So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.